through Christ.
May the words of my mouth and the thoughts of all our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O God, our strength and our salvation. Okay, so I'm going to age myself a bit here. Is there anyone who remembers, are you old enough to remember the tradition of harvest baskets? Anyone? Anyone ever done a harvest basket? For real, mate. Okay, so when I was a kid, every child had a harvest basket, and this was like a proper old-fashioned woven affair, and you would pack it full of really beautiful fruit and veg and such like, and you would decorate it with ribbons and flowers, and then you would process it to the altar feeling smug and pious and dead holy, and then you'd sing your harvest songs, and then you would stay in church to share harvest lunch. And it was a thoroughly uplifting occasion, and the only kind of dark, vaguely dark, shadowy side I remember is some of the mums were a little bit competitive about the size and quality of their baskets, and were trying to outdo one another with their offerings, and also if you'd forgotten your basket, you were mud, you were nothing, you were made to feel pretty rubbish, because we do like to judge, it's a thing. But I don't remember it ever being anything other than a joy. A church filled with corn cobs and apples and flowers. And this year, harvest is feeling a bit bleak. And not just because the actual factual harvest is bleak, yields are way down this year, due no doubt to climate change, but also possibly to fruit and vegetable pickers being locked down. But I'm thinking more of the spirit of harvest, that kind of great joy and sense of thanksgiving and blessing that we associate with harvest. But this year is replaced by acute anxiety and fear of financial security, and a sense of the precariousness of our own lives and our collective lives and way of life. But if we look at the readings that are selected for us every harvest, there's always a bit of a dark side, because every year our readings remind us that we're vulnerable and we are dependent, and that the future is as unpredictable as the weather, and the material comfort and security are not assured. And this year, of course, is no different. Alongside the exhortations not to worry, to look at the birds and look at the flowers of the field, we also have the story of the rich fool, blessed with a great harvest. He spent his life accumulating and then died before he had ever actually lived. And alongside that, we have, as we generally do every year at the harvest, a reminder from Deuteronomy that before they reached the promised land, the people of God suffered hardship and scarcity. Now, of course, the people of God had quite a bit to say about that, as we do today, and they whinged their way through the wilderness, and they missed, and bemoaned the lack of oil, the lack of figs, the lack of delicious things to eat, and they begged to be taken back into slavery, so they could have a Big Mac. And God provided for them, but they weren't happy about what he provided, possibly because it was like manna, 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 more manna, manna for breakfast, manna for dinner, manna for lunch. And now I'm all for a varied diet, but I actually think the reason why they were so pissed off with the manna was not because it's all they ever had. It's actually because the miraculous nature of manna, that if you were only allowed to gather enough for your needs for the day, you had to keep it in the day, and if you took just a little bit more, or you stored a bit up for later because you were prudent, it grew worms. And I love that story. I love teaching that story in schools. I make dough balls with dyed spaghetti as worms in the middle of it, that when you break it open, it's full of worms. The kids don't mind, they eat the worms as well as the bread. But I think that the worms are the true message of harvest for us. When we take too much, individually, collectively, it tends to breed worms after a while. And if we think back to 2016, when the whole of Europe, if you remember, the whole of Europe was in a uproar about the number of migrants, the record number of migrants arriving on our shores. And here in the UK, we were busily taking back our borders with the Brexit referendum. In France, they were bulldozing refugee camps at Calais. In Italy, they were refusing permission for rescue boats to dock in their ports. And yet in all that public discourse, no one seemed to be making any connection between the fact that we had too much and we had taken too much, and now, you know, things were going a bit wormy. There was no discussion about the appallingly low and falling rate of development aid. There was no discussion about the historical and continuing unfair trade relationships between the rich north and the poorer south. You know, no one seemed to have commented on the coincidence that the many Western governments were complicit in wars in areas of the world that just happened to be rich sources of oil. It was all about what we were suffering, and not about the fact that maybe we were complicit in arriving at that situation in the first place. Well, this year, we're not so worried about migrants, probably because we realised we quite need them. But we are worried about the coronavirus, and we can't blame that on unfair trade. But we could blame it on overfarming and the destruction of the natural environment. In fact, recent rise in what they call zoonotic diseases, that's viruses that cross diseases that cross the species barrier, such as swine flu and SARS and MERS and now COVID, have all been linked both to the destruction of natural habitats and to truly intensive farming practices. Civets, camels, pigs, you name it, we'll exploit it. We have taken more than we need. And now the worms are breeding at a pretty alarming rate. Winston Churchill said, you make a living by what you get, but you make a life by what you give. You make a life. The rich fool in the parable has got quite a lot, but he doesn't have life. He had stuff, but a life, a real life, a life full of community and relationships and people, full of hope and purpose, full of meaning, a life that connected him to things that were bigger than himself. What Jesus offers us in the parable and what is offered to us in that promise of the promised land is a chance to live lives that are filled to the brim, not with stuff, but with, you know, life, abundant life, a chance for our lives to be part of something greater than we are, a chance to be connected with the lives of others, the life of the planet, life of God that continues to move creatively and generously through us. And it is true that such a life costs, and at Harvest-Fired, or even the most spectacular of harvest baskets, and yet the rewards are so much greater. For life is more than what we get. It is what we give. Choose life.